we also have an exciting day at the end of this conference, the last day on it, called Open Conference Day. And this is the day where our community speakers have been nominated and they have chosen to speak on particular topic that is relevant to this theme. Again, the theme is around data, data science, data analytics, and building management careers in data. Right. So throughout the discussions and sessions that you will see more emphasis on that. So, the folks from the community have nominated topics to talk. Please go ahead and choose your favorite topic and vote for it. So you can quickly use your mobile phone camera to scan the QR code, and it will directly take you to that page where you can vote. Right. So, if your speaker gets selected to speak on the conference, then you will get some incredible prizes, right? So go ahead and do that. For those of you who are not able to scan this, the link for this will also be posted on the chat window on the webinar. So go ahead and click that, right? And there's also, a fun element here where we would like you to go to this web page called Leaderboard. And again, you scan the QR code, it will directly take you to the leaderboard, where there are 2-3 steps, and with every step that you take, you actually win some points. And the person who is on the top of the leaderboard at the end of the day will get an exclusive one-on-one 30-minute career counseling and coaching session with a senior executive in the industry. So it's not often that you get such opportunity, and IPL works with lots of industry leaders to make these available. So please go ahead and click that. And another important aspect is the speaker, the moderator, and the panelists will be on video. Rest all of you will be on audio and muted, because we are expecting several hundreds of people joining these sessions. In fact, the product edition that we just concluded, as I said, we had about 1,600 people joining across the country and even from overseas, right? So, and to facilitate better and efficient conversation, a specific LinkedIn thread has been created for every session. So Mr. Shamik's session here, as there is a dedicated LinkedIn session. The QR code again is to the right. Please scan that and it will take you to the LinkedIn thread. Please ask your questions there, and the team and myself will be monitoring that thread and will pick the relevant and most common questions to answer. So one of the feedback that we got in the last session was that we should ask more questions from the community. So absolutely, we will do that. And I just wanted to show you, so here is a quick thread that is created, and you see there are already some questions coming in. So, right, so which is good. And I think with that, I would like to introduce you today, to today's session facilitator, Mr. Pinkesh Shah. Pinkesh is an ex-vice president of product management at McAfee, global product management. He's also senior faculty and an executive mentor at IPL. Many of you who are familiar with IPL are well aware of him. So Pinkesh, I'd like you to introduce our guest speaker today and facilitate today's sessions, please. Thank you.
Absolutely, pleasure. You guys can hear me okay there?
Yep.
Super. Well, I am particularly interested and super excited for today's session. Not only have I known Shamik for some time, he's one of those individuals who is very humble and yet super accomplished. If there is a embodiment of a lot more substance and a lot less sizzle, I think here is the epitome and the example of that in this world. A role model to many of us. Shamik started his career as an engineer, but kind of moved into very rapidly, series of, roles in Bay Area startups. His company got acquired by Oracle, a security software company that he had, he was one of the co-founders. Several senior executive roles in across the range of industries, from edtech to marketplaces, to content publishing, to gaming. Somebody who has 30 plus patents, who's grown businesses like Myntra and helped scale it to multifold. He was the CPO and CTO at Myntra. And right now he's running very, very interesting initiatives at CureFit as an angel investor who's also invested in several startups. It's my proud privilege to kind of introduce Shamik and welcome you to this session. I understand, Shamik, that you are an eclectic reader. What's on your reading list right now, especially with the times that we're in right now?
I'm reading philosophy, believe it or not.
Right time. I think there's a lot more application for it now than ever before. Um, without further ado, I want to kind of introduce the topic as well. I think it's a fascinating way to start in a more action-oriented, applied context of data science, where the topic is about several case studies of applied data science in action. And I think we certainly look forward, Shamik, to hear more from you. With your experiences with Myntra, with Cult, but even before that, in terms of how have you kind of transcended these roles and applications of data science in building multi-million-dollar businesses, monetizing them, kind of structuring them. But before we do that, I want to put a quick poll for your benefit, Shamik, and for the benefit for all of us as we kind of have this opening keynote of this festival for the 5 days, as I mentioned, in terms of who is in the audience today. Can we have the poll on the screen? And if everyone can kind of take a quick minute to kind of identify, your role in the context of data. Are you a data analyst, analyzing data, making inferences and kind of living in a day in the life of a data analyst? Are you a data engineer focused on big data and leveraging aspects of storing and retrieving? Are you a hardcore data scientist, living in the world of mathematics and algorithms and hopefully finding some new cure for COVID? Are you a data science manager who is probably a combination of business, technology, and data? Perhaps not in a current data role is also another option, or other. So these are the options we have on the screen, and I think I see 250 plus responses so far, and we'll give another second to compile so that I think we have a good idea on the audience. Okay, so I think let's stop the poll, and now that we've crossed 300, let's see. So it turns out about half of them, or slightly more than half, are in some kind of data role. Most of them are not, Shamik, and so I think hopefully that gives you some perspective. Even though the context today I know is not going to be hardcore, technology driven, but more so the application of it. I think this is very useful for us to also know who's in the audience, here today. A second quick poll, if I can ask the team to also put in terms of the work experience, in terms of how many years in the industry have people spent here today who've joined us. If you can kind of put that, poll on the screen for us to kind of know the maturity and the level of the audience as well. So it looks like a predominantly, 10 plus years, of experience here so far, as I see the polls number coming in. And I think, Shamik, one of the things that I'd like for you to also touch upon is, while data science is a relatively, hot buzzword now, but even as a field in the last several years, it's been a very recent, rapid amount of, advancements that have happened from a skill and career perspective. People who have 7 plus 10 plus years of experience, one of the things that I think we always hear in the community is how do you kind of how do you adapt to new tricks of the trade, right? Because it is imperative that data science is not just for geeks. It's data science is not just for data scientists. I think in some sense it's also like Excel. A musician cannot live without Excel in today's world, right? And so as data science becomes this ubiquitous tool, irrespective of which profession, which role you play, especially for senior leaders, maybe perhaps some advice as we go in and learn from your examples on what you've seen, and perhaps some actionable advice, some prescriptive guidance on what they could be doing and what they should be doing, perhaps when you are 5 plus years or 10 plus years of experience. in a certain domain, in a certain zone, right? So without further ado, kind of let me send it over to our star speaker of the show. Shamik, all yours.
Thank you, Pinkesh. I hope I'm audible. People can hear me.
Absolutely, loud and clear.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen, and this seems to work about 50% of the time. So just let me know if it's working.
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Great. And is this in presentation mode?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So just a second, I'm presenting the wrong slide deck here. Just give me a second.
So while Shamik pulls up the deck, I'd strongly encourage all of you to get up and close and this opportunity to ask questions. One of the things that we always encourage is by practitioners for practitioners, and so put your questions in that LinkedIn thread. I think that was shared earlier. I did recognize that some of you had put the comments that it's hard to copy paste that URL, but try to take the short URL perhaps. And you can also search Shamik and Product Leadership Festival or Institute of Product Leadership, hashtag on LinkedIn, and you'll find that thread. So certainly start pouring your questions as well as we get to the later part of our talk, so that we can bring your questions into the live session here today.
Great.
We can see your session. We can see your presentation in full screen mode now.
Great. So I'm going to try and maybe speak for about 30, 40 minutes. And I'll take questions towards the end. Primarily not, I actually like a more interactive sessions, but on Zoom, it's a little bit harder to do that. And secondly, this presentation is more of a story. I'm going to make a case for something that is not yet true, but I think is going to be true. And for that story to evolve and come out, I need to kind of talk about the key point at the end. And before you kind of hear the key point, I think it'll be awkward to take questions. So let's go through the slides. There aren't too many. And then at the end, we will take all the questions, okay? So first, an introduction about me. I think Pinkesh has already told you about me. I've had two, if I look at my career, it's basically in 2 decades. The last decade, 2000 to 2010, was in the Bay Area, approximately. And then the last decade has been in Bangalore. And I started out as an academic, as a research scientist in HP Labs and in the University of Maryland, where I was writing papers, patents, and stuff like that. And then you can't stay in the Bay Area without getting sucked into the entrepreneurial vortex. So I founded a security software company. And then I joined Yahoo for a while, and that was my switch from enterprise software to consumer software. And then after that, I've been at many startups inside the Valley, including social gaming marketplaces, advertising, and including a camera hardware company where I built a light field camera. And then moved here the early part of this decade. And I was, for most of this period, for about 7 years, was the Chief Technology and Product Officer at Myntra. We went through quite a eventful journey there. And then for a couple of years after that, I was both just an angel investor investing in companies, but also running a venture studio called Kraftwerks Lab, where I was starting up projects, investing in projects and building them. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the examples I give. Most recently, for the last 2 years, I have been at CureFit, which is a health tech company. Might be well known to you guys. We run a lot of fitness centers, food, teleconsultation clinics, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my background. And the reason I'm explaining this background is because what I speak of will be colored by my own biases and experiences in both the Bay Area and Bangalore. Okay. So while I will talk about examples in data science, I want to tell a larger, deeper story of what I see is happening. And this is kind of, this slide is going to set that up. And this is what I have seen software evolve as over the last 20 years. So in the late 90s, when I joined the workforce, software used to be, and in the mid 90s, early 90s, this was more true. The internet wasn't quite there, or at least wasn't penetrated deeply. And most people had desktop software, both at companies as well as individually. And they were mostly tools. I mean, you use things for productivity, invoicing tools, or solving point problems. And then if you look at how it evolved, on the top, you see the B2B side of things. B2B started moving into more productivity tools, things like Lotus Notes and spreadsheets and stuff like that. And on the consumer side, we started evolving into the computer and software providing information. So we saw Yahoo, Google, and companies of that sort providing informational services to you. And then communications tools started coming out, email, Lotus Notes, etc. in the B2B side on top, and similarly chat, social networks, etc. on the consumer side. You could now connect with friends, and on the top side, you see that companies could now talk to customers. So you had companies that like Siebel and so on coming up with CRM tools, marketing tools, and so on. Google providing advertising networks. And most recently, we've seen collaboration software coming out very strongly in the enterprise, while consumers have been using software to entertain themselves with Netflix, games, and so on. And now we're evolving to where services are available via software. And by services, I mean things like Swiggy, e-commerce, etc. And on the enterprise side, that means things like finance tools, or supply chain as a service, or warehousing as a service, etc. And the open question for us is, as we evolve like this, what's next? And this presentation is a little bit about what my hypothesis is about what comes next. See, one key shift that has happened over the last 10 years is that while software used to be considered as primarily digital services, so if you look at entertainment, social networking, email, communication tools, information networks, these are all digital services. Even the initial services that came out, like Make My Trip or Expedia, they were providing something that wasn't a physical good at your doorstep. It provided a PDF of a ticket or so on. But recently, we've now moved to digital services, right? Non-digital services. And this is a very significant change that I have experienced personally, from moving from working in the first decade in the Bay Area on primarily just digital services to Myntra, where this problem was very, very physical. So a step back, this is a saying by Paul Coelho, and it's pretty famous. It says that when you really want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. And it seems like pretty philosophical, right? It means that if you really want something, things will, kind of conspire to make it happen. And what have we used it for? And if you look at it, this has actually happened. It's true today, except it's in a very mundane fashion. I want a pizza. I press some buttons on a device, and lo and behold, somebody somewhere out there is starting to make a pizza, and a motorcycle starts up, and a delivery boy whips that pizza over through traffic into my doorstep. Isn't that amazing? I mean, the fact that you wanted a pizza and suddenly the universe has conspired to help you achieve eating that pizza, right? So, I mean, it's the same thing with Uber. I press a button and somewhere a car moves, comes over to my doorstep, picks me up, takes me somewhere. This is quite incredible, right? It's just that we've gotten so used to it that we don't think of how incredible this achievement is that the last 10 years has brought upon us, right? So I think what we have now, kind of achieved is when you want stuff, stuff comes to you. Of course, we're talking of the people who can afford it, but from a technology perspective, this is quite possible today. The whole supply chain, procurement, logistics, all of that is now doable. What's next is you now want people. If you think of yourself as a king of this new world, you wanted stuff and stuff comes to you. What can come next is people. I want people to do stuff for me, right? And that is what this presentation is about. So here's the problem that will come about when I, put forward this hypothesis of how people will come and help you, right? The problem is that when we started off with tools, they scale well. Content scales perfectly. You make a content once, you can show it to as many people as you want. Making Game of Thrones is quite, it's difficult, but once you do it, 100 million people watch it, right? Services, they scale, but not so much, right? It's very hard to make a services company that has actually become profitable yet. And Amazon is one, Alibaba is another. But if you look at Swiggy, Myntra, Flipkart, even, it hasn't yet, become profitable, but there is hope. It's still early days yet in this industry, right? But one thing we do know for sure is that people don't scale. If I provide a person to you, then it's not possible for me to provide that same person to a million other people, right? And this is the fundamental problem that we'll be talking about today. So we're going to keep that thought in the back burner for a while, and I'll come to the main point of the talk, and I'll give you some examples of data science in action that I have personally been involved in over the last 10 years. And then we will come back to the question that I asked about what is next. How do people services expertise get provided to you at low cost in a scalable manner, right? And my hypothesis is that this is the problem to solve for the next decade. All right. So first example, this is Myntra. So in Myntra, the way that fashion industry works is it's a very long lead cycle. So the way it works is that a designer designs a piece of garment. Then you have a road show where the person who designed it, the brand usually, will go and show it to retailers and say, hey, do you like this shirt? I'm going to make 1 million pieces of it if you place an order, right? And then if you get the orders, then you make it and then you retail it. And 7 times out of 10, people hate that product. So it's a ripped t-shirt, ripped jeans work, but ripped t-shirts don't work. So you've got, so many thousands and thousands of pieces of a t-shirt lying in waste in your warehouse. And that's why you see the discounts and end of season sales and so on, right? So in order to solve this problem at Myntra, what we tried to do was think about whether we can shorten this 12-month cycle into a 2-month cycle where you design and make stuff within and get it to retail on Myntra in a 2-month period. Now, in order to do this, the design cycle cannot take 3 months. The design cycle has to be done in a few days, maybe 4 or 5 days, right? And as soon as you get data in October about what's going to work in this winter period, you have to be able to design it within a week. You have to be able to manufacture it within 2 weeks so that you still have 2 months of that season to sell the product in. So in order to do this, at Myntra, we did this project called Rapid, which said that we're going to automate fashion design. Right? And the way it worked was you took the top seller, bottom seller sales data from Myntra, Jabong, Flipkart, all the group companies, and you put it into an AI designer, which would look at all the attributes of all the products that were for sale, whether half sleeves work better, short sleeves work better, what kind of print pattern works, the colors and so on, what works and what doesn't work. And the designer automated system would create designs and you keep on churning at it and looking at the sales data and saying, if I produced a shirt like this, and this is design iteration number 20, it would look very terrible, right? But it would keep on cranking at it. And this would how the t-shirts used to look at design iteration 100, 300, and then it picks the best of those and it creates designs like this, right? And could even give a score. What is the likelihood of this shirt becoming a top seller, right? And say, okay, this is the likelihood is 70%. These are some examples of the machine-generated designs that actually got made. There is a brand, you can go to Myntra even today and buy this brand called Moda Rapido. This is an in-house brand. There is no designer working on this brand, by the way. It was launched in 2015. 30 days from concept to go live means the product is already manufactured, which is 1/5 of the fastest other industry averages, companies like Zara, etc. It gives 3x the rate of sale of any other brand on Myntra, and 2x the gross margins, because you'd spend much less times on inventory holding, moving the products from one warehouse to the other to a point where it sells. And today it makes over $100 million in revenue for Myntra. Okay? So this is one example. Second example, this is a company that was incubated in Craftworks, my venture studio. And the product is called SpaceJoy. You can go to spacejoy.com. And it's a service for US customers mostly that designs a room for you, right? So the way it works is you upload some pictures of the room you want to decorate or get an interior designer for. You enter the dimensions of that room. A designer will call you and ask you a little bit about your tastes and what colors you like, etc. And in 2 days, the designer will send you a design. So that seems pretty easy to do. You just need a marketplace of designers, and a designer can work on their own tools and get you a design. But here's what's interesting, right? So this is the kind of designs you get on SpaceJoy, right? Which is a 3D model. It looks very real. It must take the designer a lot of time to create this. Typically, a designer that does this will take about a week and charge about $1,000 in the US. It can range up to $5,000 for a large, expensive, complicated design. But in that range of $1,000 to $5,000. Here's how much it does cost. $49, right, on SpaceJoy. How does this happen? Well, there's a lot of automation that goes behind the scenes. You enter your floor plan, which can either be your, a 2D model, or it can just be pictures. The system automatically creates a 3D model out of this, of your house or your room. And then it fills it in with products that it knows that will fit in the room and according to the taste expressed by the user. And then the designer comes in and just tweaks a bunch of stuff. And the designer, what usually takes about 3 to 4 days, a lot of which is grunt work, by the way, in just placing stuff, putting the lighting, shadows, texture, and so on. All of that is automated, and a designer can complete the interior design in 2 hours, right? And that is why it costs $49 rather than a few $1,000s. Okay. Third example, Kubrick.io, yet another company that we worked on in the venture studio. It's an automated video editor, right? So here's the use case. You have catalog images on Myntra or Flipkart or any website you go to, similar to this. Like, this is an example of a bike. And typically a company that sells bikes, like Decathlon does, would have hundreds of these bikes, or at least dozens. And every one of these bikes would need a video of this sort, right? So I hope that video was visible. So what Kubrick does is it automates video creation of this sort. You just give it one video of one bike, and it figures out, okay, so you want to spin the wheel, you want to spin the pedal, you want to tell the dimensions of the wheel. Here's what you want to do. So it looks at one created video like this by a human, and it automatically does the same thing for all the other items in your catalog that match it, right? So again, it takes what should have taken a video editor at least a couple of hours, if not days, and just does all of that in seconds. So, externally in the US, creating a video like that, each video would cost you about $50. And Kubrick does that for $1 per video. Fourth example, this is Cult Live. This is a CureFit for people who are working out with CureFit at home. They would be familiar with this. This allows you to work out interactively at home. And the interaction part is that the camera on your phone watches you. You can see the guy with the blue shirt on the top right. That's the person using this application. And it gives you a score at the bottom bar, which is called the energy meter. And this energy meter then tracks your motions and gives you a score, which allows you to then compete with other people and get a very gamified experience. But it's not just that. it's like a fitness trainer who's actually watching over you, because after the class, we send you a lot of reports saying, here's what your workout plan should be. Here are the poses you need to correct. If it's yoga, for example, these are the areas in which you are strong. These are areas in which you can improve. Here are some video snippets of what the motion should be like versus your motion, how you've improved over time, and even motivational messages about what you did well and how you can do better, right? And all of this is through a pose detector algorithm that runs on your phone and tracks all your joints and limbs. Okay. So I'll pause here, and then I'm going to talk about takeaways. So, and come back to the slides I had come at the beginning, right? So these are some examples. But I'm coming back to this slide, and I'll connect the examples I gave to the message I had in the beginning, right? But at this moment, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions.
Shamik, there are several questions coming in, but I think we can continue and probably take those questions at the end, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a better idea. Shamik, go ahead.
Hello, guys. Audible?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear us, Shamik?
Hello. Can you say that again? Sorry, Pinkesh.
Hey, what we're saying is that I think we'll take the questions at the end.
Okay.
So go ahead and don't stop your train of thought.
Okay.
This is pretty exciting.
Great. So what we have covered is some examples, and just close my chat window here. So the key takeaways from this, right? So the first thing is that I argue that what we think as creative skills can actually be packaged as a service. But this packaging is not easy. It needs new product skills that people need to develop. And just like in each of the other iterations as we develop from tools to services, we needed to develop new product skills. Similarly, in order to be able to build these services, creative skills services, we need very new kinds of skills that many of us will need to retrain ourselves on. And the key insight here is that what customers want is they want the human touch, but they want it at the low price of technology, right? And this is the challenge that the product manager faces when they are just trying to combine technology and product into a package that works for the customer. Okay. I'm going to step back a bit and talk a little bit about what I've observed over the last 20, 30 years. And this slide is actually a chart from ourworldindata.org. And what it does is it tracks how goods have either increased or decreased in price over the last 20 years. And what you can notice is that some things have actually become cheaper and some things have become much, much more expensive. And if you look at what is the common thing that has gone up in price, these are things that need humans: education, healthcare, food, transportation, right? Whereas goods, products, software, electronics, toys, TVs, etc., they have actually become cheaper, right? So making stuff, which is what we've been good at for the last 10 years, is actually becoming deflationary. It's not going to be a very profitable venture for people to start companies in or build products for. What we need to build products for are human-related services, such as education, healthcare, food services, etc. So this is what I believe the next step will be. This is what I call expertise as a service, where instead of software as a service, you're providing some kind of human expertise as a service. So in the B2B world, this means that what you thought of as tools for finance, tools for marketing, etc., will actually become a marketing video creator or a legal advisor, an email writer, right? The content writer, the fund manager, Instead of thinking of tools for people, you're thinking of the people themselves as software. And similarly, in the B2C world, things which are tools for us will now be replaced, not replaced, but substituted and added by people that we think are needed, but now available as services over the internet. And this includes things like fitness trainers, doctors, designers, teachers, therapists, wealth advisors, and so on. Many, many other examples here. And these are all the people. It's almost like you're a billionaire and you have this whole retinue of people who are there to help you. And imagine how much more productive and how easier life would be if you had all of these people at your beck and call, right? And that is the future I think we're headed down towards. This is how the business model works, which is that customers today pay a lot of dollars to talk to experts of the kinds that we talked about before, which is why only the very rich people have access to them. Most people here would not have a personal trainer, and yet those people that do have a personal trainer can vouch for how effective it is and how they're able to live a very fit life because they have a person who watches over their health every day. But if we were to make that accessible at 1/10 the price by providing expertise as a service by some smart combination of AI and a human, then a lot more customers would use these services. Many of us would not think of using an interior designer just to design a room, and we live with the crappy room that we have. But if that room can be redesigned by somebody for a fraction of the price that you imagine it will take, just imagine how many more people will redesign their rooms, right? So these are the big opportunity areas that I see in the next decade. Health and wellness, education, marketing, legal and financial services. These are all places where a lot of humans are involved and a lot of expertise is imparted from one person to the other. And I think all of these are amenable for providing expertise as a service. But in order to do so, we need very different kind of product thinking. So instead of thinking as what do I provide as a service, the product feature is all about providing expertise. And the design problem, the UX or the product design problem, is how do you make it feel human, even if most of the work is being done in an automated fashion. And the differentiation between products that are competing in this market will be about how much emotional connect are you able to generate at scale. And the pricing power comes from how much investment the customer is willing to make in your product, because the differentiation comes from the emotional connect. So how much emotional investment are they willing to make? And how does your product allow them to make that emotional connect and emotional investment? Happy to talk about that because this is a pretty complex topic about how you differentiate in a world where expertise itself is becoming commoditized. So this is my last slide. And the point I would like to make is just like the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, automated physical labor, but it created a lot of jobs for people who could work with machines. I believe that the data science revolution is going to automate expertise, but it will create a lot of jobs for people who are willing to work with data science and AI, but not in the mundane way that people often think about it, which is that, oh, I need to learn data science, I need to learn deep learning, and I need to learn about TensorFlow and so on. All of that is important, but there is, if you think of all of that as a commodity, there's a lot of product expertise and product skills as well that needs to be brought to bear in order to really solve these problems. So that's all that I had. I hope that I have stressed upon the key point I'm trying to make, which is that we're headed for a world where expertise is becoming a service and data science has a big role to play, but so does product thinking and product design.
That is just absolutely brilliant. Very, very thought-provoking, Shamik. I can see the question board is lighting up now with a lot of questions, but I think before I jump to those, I had a a quick question myself. We hear a lot about, the gig economy, and while this gig economy context is not in connection with AI and data science, but this whole freedom of being wherever you are, whoever you are, and kind of as opposed to working for someone full time, you're available for a slice of your time, right? In fact, thanks to Uber, this whole thing got accelerated in the Bay Area, at least 10 years ago, and I think we're seeing a lot more now in India. Thanks to the individual, you know, kind of employees, but still on contract, right? Working professionals, but still working on their own time, their own style, their own decision. And I'm sure, you've kind of generated a whole, with Cult, a whole set of kind of fitness professionals who are now, becoming freelancers in some sense and kind of, doing what they do. So are you implying that this whole expert as a service is on the foundation of a model called gig economy already that we've seen as established, or are you seeing that getting disrupted, with this new XaaS, is that how you pronounce that, by the way? That's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah,
Uh,
service.
yeah. How do you see the two work together?
Yeah, see, the way I see the gig economy is that much of the logistical human involvement, right? Things which are, cooking food, delivering products from one place to the other, moving stuff, warehousing, motions, etc. I think all of that is what I look at the gig economy, and I think that these are not places where expertise is really needed. So these will become quickly, not quickly, but maybe in a decade or two, will become automated in the sense that there will be automated cars. Warehousing is already becoming automated with robotics. In China, you rarely see a warehouse worker nowadays. And similarly, I think delivery robots, drones, etc., will soon take over that part of the gig economy. And I think people, while that will cause a lot of employment issues, I don't think from a just technology or a product point of view that is a very unforeseeable future. I think people have kind of reconciled themselves to the fact that this will probably happen, right? What I think people are not seeing is that that aspect of the gig economy and expertise as a service will come and pervade all our lives, even in the skills that we think are not amenable for data science to play a role in. And this includes things like doctors, engineers, software creation, movie making, acting, et cetera, et cetera. And this will be a slow, steady process. And it will be more like, augmentation in the beginning, but slowly replacing more and more of the grunt work of people until a point comes where, that person is no longer needed.
Fascinating. There's a lot of questions. I have a few, but I'm going to hold on to mine. I'm going to switch to some of the audience questions. I think Anju Agrawal has a good question. I think she is very curious that, while you showed an amazing, movie, if you will, right, of all these things happening, especially your T-shirt and how Myntra was able to automate and cut down the cycle. And it's almost like the machine is generating the designs which are going to have high probabilistic sales. Can you walk us through maybe a little bit about how you got in the making of that movie, right? How before you kind of, and of course, I'm sure it's a long process and it may take a longer time to explain, but can you kind of give some highlights and insights into what kind of systems did you have to put in place internally for Myntra in that particular case study for it to actually materialize for these business models to work?
Yes. So by the way, I've played both a technologist role and a product person's role throughout my career. And I would think of myself as a product person first, right? So while I'm painting a picture that might seem very, futuristic and technologically advanced, I don't, approach products from that perspective. Okay, I have a piece of fascinating technology. How do I apply it, right? So I would like to think of always a product as here's what the customer wants and how do I provide that and how do I use technology. Like if you look at SpaceJoy, for example, nowhere does it say AI. We don't use the word AI at all. In Kubrick, we never use the word AI unless it's to pitch to an investor, right? So the customer has to feel that actually a human is doing it. And the fact that you're able to do it faster, cheaper, the customer really doesn't care. In fact, they don't want to hear that this was designed by a machine. They want to hear that this fashion, that shirt that I'm wearing was designed by a designer. Everyone wants to hear that, right? So in order to do that, right, the problem that we were trying to solve was not to say, okay, how can I design a t-shirt by a machine? The problem we were trying to solve was, how do I make a t-shirt that is going to sell well and do that within a month, right? And in order to do that, you have to look through every part of that cycle. The designer actually is not the biggest part of that cycle. The designer in a normal period of a 12-month cycle takes about a month, right? The making is, and the selling part of it is what takes the most time. So behind the scenes at Myntra, we had to work a lot on how do we shrink the supply chain part of it. And I mean by that, the procurement supply chain. So a lot of tricks went in towards prefetching fabric. So for example, you would tell that, I'm going to make a bet. I don't know what kind of t-shirts are going to work this year, what colors are going to work, but I'm going to get gray fabric that can be easily dyed into many separate colors. And I'm going to stock up the gray fabrics in all of my textile mills beforehand. And I'm going to pick maybe the top 10 color dyes, and I'm going to procure them in advance. And now the reason why the system is more important, that AI designer is so important, is that if you tell a human designer, oh, by the way, I know you want to design X, but sorry, I only have these 10 colors. You have to design it with those 10 colors. Human designers, our creative folks, they don't like to operate within these very narrow boundaries, especially if you give them 20 attributes saying it has to be half sleeve, it has to have a button of this color, it has to have these colors only, it has to have this fabric, etc., etc. Those, the number of parameters that a human would have to think about to design within those constraints would be impossible. And this is why the AI designer works, because it can take all of these complex constraints into account and say, oh, if you're constraining me within all of this, then this is the design that I can make, and this you can produce within a week.
Interesting. So kind of start from that end goal in mind, and then kind of work through your processes internally to make sure that you use and leverage the right set of technology, perhaps, to achieve that, right? In fact,
one point here, right? So when a product person thinks of all of this, right? The problem today is that if you're a product manager and you're thinking that, oh, I need to do X, Y, Z, the place where people kind of stop and don't jump across the chasm is that they think that, oh, this thing can only be done by a human, so it's not possible, right? And what I'm trying to ask everybody around me is to take that flying leap of faith, that what you think. So if you said I could do the procurement beforehand, I can get the gray fabric, I can get the dyes, I can do it, but oh shit, my designer cannot do it in less than a month. And that's the part that most people would have stopped at. And at Myntra, we said, no, actually even design, fashion design can be done by a machine. And that's the last step that kind of unlocks the value.
Fascinating. In fact, Rishi from the audience has a very related question. And I think his view or his question is, how do you convince a set of people internally, right? Because I'm sure everybody may not see for a brand new vision like this, for the first time when you're introducing something, I'm sure there are others in the organization who may not see the vision, the value, the clarity with which perhaps a data science professional or a data product manager is going to present these ideas with. And so a lot of times you get into this difficulty of getting this type of data science feature approved, if you will, right? In fact, related to that, I'd also like to maybe throw up a poll. And so the question for you, Shamik, is, what do you think has been, in your experience, in your long history of having working with data science driven products, the kind of biggest difficulty in getting these data science projects, data science features, data science, new subsystems approved internally, right? With your management team, with investors, and so on and so forth. But before you answer that, let's kind of throw up that poll to the audience, and let's see what the group thinks here. as to what are the most actually no, that's the wrong poll. Can you use the poll which has the biggest difficulty in getting data science feature? I think poll 17. Okay, looks like there's a number mismatch. Can you remove this poll and put the poll for the project of data science? And what are the what are the difficulties in typically convincing somebody internally? Perhaps while you guys figure out on the poll question, I'll let Shamik first answer that, and then kind of see what the audience thinks as well.
Sure. See, one of the benefits of having a long career is that, you've seen these changes in the technology world come many times. Not that every technology change, has a big impact, but when mobile came, when the internet and software as a service came, and cloud computing came, and all of these things came, it was no different as a problem in order to convince people of the change that is upon us, right? I know that many of you may remember when Myntra went mobile only. That was pretty hard as well. I mean, people would disbelieve that mobile would become the primary way of doing shopping, right? And now I expect that, if you did a poll now of how many people shop from their laptops versus how many people shop from their mobile devices, I think that number would be well over 95%, right? So, and yet convincing that was no easier. And I think that that is kind of the product manager's job at every point when they see the technology trend shifting, to be able to make the case of where the future lies and what is the product that makes sense in this new world, right? So I think data scientists have no different a problem. It's not more acute. In fact, if any, there's a lot of social buy-in of the fact that data science is important. So I think they have an advantage compared to the previous waves of technology changes that have come before us. It, of course, does need a lot of evangelizing, setting out the vision, and explaining the product. And there are a lot of tools that help any product manager. This is, presentation skills, making up mocks, getting stakeholder buy-in through presentation, having a strong business model behind it, etc.
So you're saying that, even though it's a data science specific, ask, your usual stakeholder management, leading by influence, your ability to tell a story, I think is all still very, very strongly relevant, even in this case as well. But I always thought that, unlike other business decisions, data science is uh, slightly more unpredictable in terms of how long will it take for that model to fine tune, right? While there are a lot of unpredictability in all parts of the business, uh, I, don't you think there is a higher degree of uncertainty, if I can use that word, and hence making it increasingly difficult? Add to that, sometimes now you may be fortunate to work with Mukesh and many such stalwarts, yourself, kind of having surrounded by smarter people. But what about people who are working in a traditional organization where data science is so new to the management team, perhaps? While it's a boardroom buzzword, putting up $500,000 for an investment for something that has potentially unpredictable timelines to deliver and unproven business models to show. Do you see that any differently difficult, or do you still see that's no different than a typical product case that you have to make?
Yeah, I actually don't see it as different. I do think that the way you evangelize it is a slightly different. So, and I think that is something that the data scientists themselves need to learn, right? I see that as a message, not as a problem with the board and the stakeholders. I see that as a problem that I see in many data scientists and data folks, which is that they start, and this has been true for every technology change that has come in the past as well. You look at it as a technology reason for doing it, saying, I need to train these models, I need to do this, without being very clear about what is the business benefit, right? And how is this product going to be used by the user? So the user, the customer actually doesn't give a damn about whether it is data science or AI or whatever, right? So they just want to get that interior design. They just want a good looking t-shirt. They just want a nice catalog video. They just want to be able to do their fitness class and have good data coming on it. They don't care about it's an AI fitness trainer or what. So, and I think what we tend to do is to not evangelize that end value proposition, but instead we talk about why it is data science, right? So I would encourage all the folks here not to give up their data science ivory tower position and to think about the problem in mundane worlds of the user and to think about then about, to solve it in the best way possible. And if data science has a role to play there, that's great. But if you can solve the problem without data science, do that.
Interesting. And by the way, now we can kind of share the poll results. You can kind of see on the screen what the sentiment in the group here is, with about 450 people, sharing their view. And turns out that one of the highest factor, at least on their mind, is this whole, which I also have heard this many times, Shamik, is that this lack of tangible business revenue projection, or the ability to communicate that tangible business revenue projections and ROI. I think is the biggest hurdle for a lot of these data science school features, still sitting in the labs and never kind of making it out, beyond just an experiment, right? So fascinating. Tell us a little bit about this new energy meter and this new cool. It seems like we're kind of living inside an Xbox now. Right? We're kind of, we are part of the character of this game. Looks like. And I also like the fact that you continuously are stressing that there has to be this human emotional connect, as opposed to kind of doing things in an automated way, where there's a self-guided way or a chat bot type of thing, or a robot trying to guide you. There's this element of an instructor who's kind of out there, still working with you. I'm sure it's early enough, but at the same time, I'm sure COVID has potentially accelerated this experiment of yours, to kind of give more, kind of tailwind to try this out. What has been the results so far, and what are the two things that you feel could fail, that you continuously are watching for as you design these hypotheses and these experiments, on what you think will work and what will not?
Correct. So yes, you're absolutely right. Obviously CureFit and many other companies, all of us out there are facing a very once in a lifetime situation in terms of COVID, and this is going to impact every business. But I think what it has given tailwinds for is any business that is primarily digital connectivity, right? Whether it is Zoom or Hangouts or meetings like this, or education or fitness classes online, right? And we had not intended to launch this product yet. We were actually planning to launch it in a bigger way in the second half of this year. But the situations developed such that we expedited and we've launched it with many features still missing and still to come, right? But you actually hit the nail on the head. We want you to feel as if you're in a game, right? And it's a game. It's like a movie in which you are a part of it. And when the product kind of comes out in its full glory, hopefully you will get that feeling more and more so. But the idea is that you should feel as if, not that there is a bot that is watching you and giving you data, which a lot of, I think that's the mistake that a lot of data scientists do, right? Which is, oh, we have all this data, let's science it, right? And that's not what people are looking for. People are looking for doing workouts, feeling good, and having fun, right? So you have to use data science to make that happen. And the key insight is that today there's a lot of fitness videos online. You can go to YouTube and, there's like thousands of videos that you can work out with very good trainers, but none of them is interactive. It doesn't, no matter whether you do a poor workout or a heavy workout, you work out more or less, the world doesn't change. Nobody recognizes that fact. Right? So just applauding you when you do well and giving you a little slap on the wrist when you're not doing well completely changes the name of the game, and you feel involved, right?
Absolutely.
And that is what the energy meter and all the other science behind it is trying to do. And by the way, I feel the same thing will happen in education as well.
Yeah.
Today, it's all just one-way content delivery. And the recipients of any education, and I've done many online courses and my kids do online courses, and I feel that product innovation there has really stopped, right? And you're just kind of blasting one-way information from one side to the other and not caring about the other person. And I think a lot of similar product innovation needs to happen where you're making the other person on the other side of the screen involved in the process.
Very true. Very true. I think, almost 92% dropping of your courses on large platforms like Coursera is also a symptom of that. So super. I think we're just about out of time, but that was a fantastic conversation. I think thanks a lot, Shamik. I know Puneet, our next star, is already here. But before that, again, wanted to give a big round of applause and thank you for sharing those insights and paying it forward. Truly appreciate it. Back to you, Sai.
Thank you so much. I think, Shamik, thank you really for that insightful discussion. I've heard, people who got tired of giving acronyms like infrastructure as a service, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. I thought XaaS was coined by people who got tired of those things. But this is probably the best acronym that I've heard, expertise as a service. I'm going to use that. Thanks so much. And brilliant examples, by the way. And just before you go, a minute for the audience. The best question today among many questions that are asked goes to Ritika Agarwal. So you would be receiving your award pretty soon. And what I'd like you for the audience to do is, later on, just scan this quickly. And it's a very interesting way of gathering feedback, right? So it'll take you 30 seconds to say how you felt about the session. You found it useful and insights, and use that QR code to just do that. It'll go to that. And as Pinkesh said, we have a very exciting session lined up next with Puneet Singh Soni. But before we let Shamik go, Shamik, thank you so much in appreciation and from IPL. Would love to present you with a virtual certificate, probably the first virtual certificate that we could give for a conference. You would also receive this, by the way, via email, and we just are looking for somebody to create this in blockchain, right, so that it is there forever. And thank you so much. Talk to you later. Bye.
Right.
Okay, I think before we start the next session, maybe a 2-minute break. Over to you, Sonal.
Thank you, Sai. Hi everyone, I have shared the feedback poll on the screen right now. Please do take it. Hello everyone, we'll be starting in a minute. Thank you. Hello everyone. Very warm welcome to the Product Leadership Festival 2020 Data Edition. Thank you for joining us today. But before we start the second session of the evening, I would like to welcome our host of the evening, Mr. Sai Satish Vedam. Sai is a senior faculty and an executive coach at Institute of Product Leadership. He was most recently the Director of Product Management at Oracle. Welcome, Sai. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Sonal. Welcome back, folks, for those of you who are joining or continuing with from the previous session, and for those of you who are joining us for this session, let me just take 2 minutes to give a little bit of background on the Institute of Product Leadership and the Product Leadership Festival itself. This is as Sonal said, this is the second edition, which is focused on data. We call it as Data Edition of Product Leadership Festival. The theme of this festival is Career Insights in Product, Data, and Design. The first one, which just got concluded 10 days ago, we had 20 plus CXOs giving insightful sessions and panelists. We had about 1,600 folks joining in from across the world. It's pretty exciting to see so many participants joining in at this time. So today we are starting the data edition. The Product Leadership Festival is hosted by Institute of Product Leadership, IPL. And for those of you who are not familiar with IPL, it is an institute that started in 2012 and with a single focus of providing career transition path for senior working professionals into product leadership roles. The institute partners with various universities and organizations to design and deliver the various programs to help transition to those roles. And as part of this, the institute also creates and nurtures a community of product folks, product leaders, product managers, or aspiring product managers in this country. And we recognize that data and design are now heavily intertwined in building products. So this session, more emphasis on data and data-driven decisions, data-driven products. And we have an exciting day on day fifth day, which is May 16th, where speakers from the community who have nominated topics to talk will be presenting. So please scan the QR code in front of you using your mobile phone. It'll take you to the page where you can see all the speakers and their topics. Please vote for your favorite topics. This is like an unconference, and speakers who get shortlisted will get to present. And if the speaker that you voted to gets selected, you will win some amazing prizes, right? So go ahead and do that. And if you're unable to do that, there'll be links posted in the chat as well. So go ahead and copy them and click on them and do that. Similarly, there is a leaderboard. There are 2-3 steps that you can take. This is a fun element for you to do it. And whoever comes on top of the leaderboard, there is a very exciting opportunity to sit down with 30 minutes with a senior executive to get one-on-one career counseling and career coaching in the area of products, right? So it's a very unique opportunity. Please do take advantage of that. More importantly, I'd like all of you to post your questions in the LinkedIn thread that is specifically created for this session, so that the speaker knows and can even answer them post this session. I see a lot of people asking questions in the chat on Zoom. It is hard to monitor that. There is a lot of chatter going on. And by the way, once the session is closed, we lose those questions, right? So a better way to get those answered is post them on the LinkedIn thread. Again, scan the QR code. It will directly take you to that LinkedIn post, and then feel free to do that. With that, I would like to, again, invite Mr. Pinkesh Shah, our session facilitator today, to introduce our guest speaker today and, carry forward the proceedings. Thank you so much, Pinkesh.
Thank you, Sai. Warm welcome all of you again. Good evening and good morning to a lot of folks who've joined from overseas. Continuing with our momentum to have a immersive chat and a conversation with celebrity professionals and executives. I think let's continue with that momentum, where I'd like to give a warm welcome to Puneet. Puneet, I think we can see you. Make sure that you unmute so we also get to hear from you. You can hear us okay?
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Puneet is a role model to many around the world, especially in India. He's the co-founder and CEO of Suki. Suki is one of the hottest, AI startups out of the Silicon Valley. In fact, recently got nominated one of the best new startup for Forbes AI 50 list. They are talking about, experience as a service from Shamik Stock. Here we are continuing to spend some time with the CEO and co-founder and the brains behind Suki, an AI-powered voice assistant for doctors, and we'll learn more about that from him in a second. Many of you may know him, may recall and may remember him as the Chief Product Officer of Flipkart while he was in Bangalore, a senior product leader with Google and Motorola. Puneet has been involved in the development of several high-profile products like Google News, Google Books, Google Plus, Google Mobile, and a suite of high-performance products and Motorola devices, including Moto X, one of my favorite, Moto G and Moto E. So here we are, talking to somebody who's gonna walk the, talk the talk, walk the walk, and here we are having a fireside chat. So with that, without wasting time, Puneet, here's my first fiery question, and kind of we'll see how this goes in the conversation as more and more questions kind of pour in from the audience. I strongly encourage. Puneet does not have slides here today, so he's gonna free flow conversation with all of us, and so feel free to drop in your toughest question, your most curious question on your mind, and I'm sure we're gonna get a fantastic insightful answer from him. But Puneet, obviously a big fan, and I think a lot of us look up to you in terms of building products in an age where each one of them has been a sensational journey for, I'm sure, for you and for the markets that you've kind of served. Now, arguably at products that you've kind of built at Google, most of them perhaps didn't have direct revenue. And I think this is a big question that keeps on coming, especially with product communities. When you don't have a product that kind of makes some direct revenue, doesn't charge the customer perhaps upfront, how do you make a business case, right? How do you evangelize internally and make a business case for something like this, which is kind of free? And I'm sure there are many other ways to make money, but from a customer perspective, and are you using something similar in Suki now that you're kind of in the healthcare space? So tell us more about that as well, but kind of help us understand this dilemma that how do we continue to make products which are presumably appearing as free and yet very powerful, and yet how do you kind of associate success with and make a business case for them?
Well, first of all, Pinkesh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think we did something like this a couple of years ago, so it's really good to see how you guys have grown and become so successful in the intervening period. You also made me very happy when you said Moto X was your favorite phone. It's definitely one of the most something that's very close to my heart in terms of the work we have done. So now going back to your question, how do you make a business case for products that actually don't have direct business impact? I think it sort of depends upon the context we are in, to be honest. I can obviously give you a point of view from the Motorola days, and I can give you a point of view from the Google days. Now, Google product managers rarely learn how to worry about margins. It happens when you basically are building a business on top of a basement that's printing money. Having said that, the scale at which we operate is different when we were there, and then the kind of outcomes that you require to actually see if you have success or not is also different. Business case has to be clear, irrespective of the fact that you can't do a direct translation to exact cash flow as it's coming in. And in the case of Google, it used to be pretty straightforward. It used to be basically active usage. You look at, because if you remember, as you know, Google has probably the most significant, whether you call it eyeballs or you call it, engagement or attention monetizing machine in the world. as long as we can capture you along the flow of your attention where you're doing things, we can try and convert that into some kind of revenue. So the primary question to ask is, how do you engage and capture people's attention along the flow of doing things? Now, it depends on product to product. In certain products, for example, in search, what's actually not important, at least in the early days of search, was whether you stayed there and you were paying attention and what your engagement was in terms of the amount of time you spent. What was important was to actually give you the right answer and send you as fast as possible to the goal, to the destination. The speed at which you could find something and were sent to the place such that you didn't have to come back and look again was an indication of the quality of the product. It meant that search was working very well. So now that is a case where actually the business case was built upon a different metric, which was how quickly do you find the query that you're looking for and quickly you move off from the particular search page. If you take an example of something like YouTube, that's not the case. In YouTube, you actually are trying to keep the person there. And when they come in, what you're really trying to see is how many minutes they're spending in it, how many kinds of videos they see, what is the sequence in which these playlists are run into or automated, etc. And so it's sort of, in the case of a company that actually has an attention monetizing machine, the key business criteria then becomes a part of whatever the flow is in which you're building a product. Now, if you go to a different world and you start thinking about Motorola or a phone, in that case, it's different. You're not really trying to just bounce off and trying to figure out what metrics there are. What you're really trying to figure out is what is the utility of the products that you built, because people buying the phone is somewhat slightly disconnected from the kind of features they use in the phone after they have bought it. But if once they have bought it, they use a lot of those features, then you can actually justify investing more and trying to push more investment into the phone. And so in that case, what you're really tracking again is simple things like DAUs and weekly active usage and monthly active usage, and the fact that if you actually build a product that overlapped with something that is actually on the Play Store, then how long do you use this versus that? And we do have those kind of metrics and instrumentations to be able to do that. So again, unclear if I directly answered your question. It is really hard to answer a question around how do you impact the revenue of Google in a direct way, but attention monetization is something that Google knows very well, and so you have to create attention, and everything else can happen over time.
While there are a lot of interesting metrics that one can measure, one should measure, and depends on the kind of business. If I can go a little deeper in the question itself, that at some point, were you ever asked to quantify? And maybe Google is a different story. I like the way if you have a basement that's kind of printing machine, perhaps it's not as important. But not every company, in fact, most others around the world may not have a basement that's printing machine, printing money. And so even then, there are a lot of attempts that have been made, and many successful ones, where a product was built where there was no direct consumer revenue, and perhaps data, coming back to the theme for today, perhaps that data itself was of value. And now the question is, how do you quantify in the minds of the investor, in the minds of the management team who wants to fund this? Because if you don't associate some value, at some point this becomes a hobby project and probably will not survive too long. So I'm sure there must be some. Have you ever encountered?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Sorry, I'll let you finish before I'll respond.
No, go ahead.
Yes, that actually makes sense. And it sort of depends upon the problem statement you're solving. So for example, imagine that you are going to build a AI-based digital assistant for doctors. It seems like at least somebody here is doing it. We have, I have to show that this particular product that I'm building is going to generate some value for the user, which will actually lead to some kind of business case, right? Now, there are many different ways to actually attack this. The first question you have to ask yourself whenever you start building a product is what problem you're solving. It has to be, and the framework I really typically like to use is what is a powerful constituency that has a huge burnout issue, the solution of which aligns with the incoming tech trend. So you start there, right? Because ultimately, if you can't actually articulate that, trying to figure out what data comes to validate that doesn't make sense. And so a classic example is Salesforce. Powerful constituency is salespeople. The burnout was mostly their managers, and they were burning out because of lack of CRM. The trend was, the transition to cloud from on-prem software. Benioff built cloud CRM. Salespeople adopted hand over fist. Lots of data flows to the system. They used that data to start creating Force.com, ERP systems, all the other things, and suddenly you have a great enterprise company. So now the starting point to being able to figure out what metrics you want to actually measure, how do you want to assess the business cases, to ask yourself what's a powerful constituency. In the case of Suki, the powerful constituency that had a big problem that was burning out was doctors. Okay. Why were they burning out? They're burning out because they're using 90s style EMRs, and they're using all these clunky machines, and then they're burdened with all these regulatory burdens and liability and billing and coding and things like that. And then what's the trend? The trend that's incoming is basically that voice is becoming commoditized. Okay, now you have a story. Now the question you have to ask yourself is this a valid business case? Yes, I have actually identified an equation. What's the valid business case? So the starting, there are many different ways to do it. One way to do it is to say, if they're burning out, there must be other solutions in the market. What is the total amount of money being spent on all these solutions? One could argue that there's dictation software, there is transcription services where people in India type into EMRs for people, doctors in US, there is, scribes, human beings who sit next to the person, and then 50% of doctors type. So therefore, there is their value of time. And then there is also like the value of the time of the LPs, nurses, etc. You can take labor markets, you can take 10Ks, you can take ARR, projections for various companies and pull together what is the spend that's actually happening to solve this problem in the market. That's one way, right? One could argue that that's 10 to 20 billion dollars. And in my opinion, when you're validating a business case, after you go beyond a couple of $1 billion, it doesn't matter that much, but it's a big number. That's one way. The other way to look at it is to say, what is the per month average spend that these doctors are doing, depending upon who you talk to, on things that they're investing in. That's another way to look at it. Another way to look at it is the actual time. For example, for 1 hour of clinical work, a doctor does 1 hour of administrative work. Okay, if you can save them that 1 hour of administrative work consistently, then you end up getting 5 hours of doctor time back in a week. Hypothetically, if they saw only one more patient a day, they could more than pay for any product that saves them the rest of the 4 hours. So suddenly you're quantifying it based on that. And then finally, another way to quantify it is to actually start looking at logs and instrumentation of existing EMRs, and which, by the way, large health systems track acutely to see how much time does it take to do a particular task. And so in a classic example is, this may be a surprise to people, but in US, if you're trying to give somebody a flu shot, it takes typically about 23 clicks across various things to actually get to a place where you have approved or prescribed that flu shot to a person. Now, why would it take 23 clicks? It turns out that you're basically selecting something. There's a drop down, then you choose something, then you have to put a dosage, then you have to change the dosage, then you have to assign it to the person, then you have to go. On the flip side, you could have just said, hey, prescribe a flu shot. So these are different ways to use, to create business cases. Sometimes you use market analysis, sometimes you use time analysis, sometimes you use actual per month. spend analyses, and
Hmm.
there are many different ways in which you can figure this out.
Do you think that the business case and the genre of business cases that we're seeing now have changed or have become easy or difficult because of this whole infusion of the third element of your equation, which is the trend, right? And the trend being leveraging data science, leveraging ML, AI, in your case voice at Suki. Do you think that has an impact on developing a different genre of business cases, or do you think the business case is just the business case? This is just an accelerator. What's your view?
I think it's a trend. There is always, at regular intervals, a hype cycle, and then it kind of becomes real. I think now we're going to be very real for some time. I think that what happens is, and this has happened at regular intervals since at least 2000, is that there is a time and a phase where suddenly typically a social wave kicks off. Every 6 to 8 years, a whole new set of social networking like things start popping up. Basically, people figure out how to interact with each other differently. There was obviously the super early Friendster and all of the things that happened around that time. Then basically there came these, one but slightly larger group kind of interaction models, which were mostly Facebooks and things like that. Then you actually had the messaging apps that popped up, and then the messaging app content became smaller, and now you have messaging mixed in with content creation, which is kind of like TikTok stuff happening. And then I'm pretty sure that there will be another one that will kick off in a few years. Depending on where you are, they use different signals. And depending on the signals that they use, typically what happens is that a whole new set of products can be built. If you're in the middle of that hype cycle, then typically an investment model will involve just, hey, can you grab as much attention as possible? We will figure out the rest. And you've seen this, when we were in the, I think it was a 7-8 timeframe when there was actually another recession going on in the US at that point in time, but there was this whole, what is it called? Basically, mobile, local, you're trying to figure out how to actually use all of that. And that's when, I think Fourspace and a bunch of other companies kicked off around that time, which used location to actually figure out things. My point is that, that when you're in the middle of this hype cycle, and it has to kind of overlap with the economy being reasonably well, people's attention to actual metrics, real metrics, real practical metrics becomes a lot less. There is a lot more conversation about, just go and get as many users as possible and we'll figure out what to do with it. When you are not in the middle of it, people's attention to more practical business metrics becomes much more clearer. In general, where it comes to consumer stuff, if anybody here before or after is going to tell you that there is a craft that allows you to, an equation you can solve that will create a consumer product that's successful, they're basically bullshitting you. Okay, there are certain things you can do to keep, to not mess up. But beyond that, there is a point of you're in trend with something, something might actually connect with people. What typically people are doing with building consumer products is not that they are nailing every aspect of it upfront. They're actually somewhere in the vicinity throwing darts, and then they look at the user feedback, and the company that actually knows how to agile and be tweak and just move it very quickly are the ones that build great consumer products. And so in summary, I do believe this is a time that actually is, people are going to be much more practical about business metrics. This actually also means a lot of businesses that actually have clearer, direct monetization goals, direct, translatable margins and translatable business goals are the ones that will be funded a lot more. Consumer companies are iterative companies, which should not take too much money and should basically, you're just testing things like engagement and retention and attention and all of these things, and then figuring out how to keep building over the next 2-3 years.
Interesting. I'm going to switch to some of these questions which have started pouring in. I think Shivanda Roy has a question on, how do we use data in that process of creating that value proposition design that you very eloquently described, how what are the different phases of the developing of that business, the product business in particular, that you actually use different elements of data, while the pain of the customer is obviously paramount, like you said, and this is very traditional, product management, which, go back to the value proposition design, look at how big is the pain, look at the alternatives, look at what else is happening, or why others are not serving it, right? But now bringing the data element of it, is this changing the way, either in speed or in process or in steps, how you would frame the next big feature, the next big product, the next big idea? And a related question, from Sundar, is, in some sense, what is the most popular from your experiences, having dealt with a lot of data-driven products? What has been the most popular use, of data science? In fact, Rishi probably should get an award, because that's one of the polls that also the team had thought of. And so while the question is to you is to kind of answer, what are the popular uses of data science that you've seen, either in the process, the steps, the speed of which creating this, or the different parts of the cycle, whether it's decision making, whether it's data as a feature, whether it's dynamic pricing, and so on and so forth. But before you answer, let's kind of put up that poll also for the audience, in parallel, for the audience to vote on as well. And then I'll turn it over to Puneet. Can we have the poll, please? Super. So while the poll progresses, Puneet, what are your thoughts? How is data impacting, our traditional world of coming up with that process that you just mentioned for developing good value proposition design?
I think the most interesting thing that's happening in the market today is the practical usage of things like machine learning in product development. Machine learning, especially like broadly spoken, is almost like a buzzword. Everybody wants to include some machine learning in the slides that they put up to try to raise money. Even a dog walking app in Silicon Valley uses some kind of machine learning. But yeah, in reality, what we are seeing, Pinkesh, is that now the models that actually are underlying some of these systems have become robust enough that you can actually create very quick impact on user experience using this data that's coming out of it. So I'll give you an example. We are building a voice product. A voice product, just like an Alexa or a Siri or a Google Assistant, is basically a command and control product. So you say things to it and it'll do things for you. These things that you say are converted into things that we call intents. Intents, when they actually flow through the system, because of the nature of how humans talk, the breadth in which they can say the same idea, background noise, all sorts of other device complications, sometimes intents can break. So, imagine there's an intent which says, what's the schedule today for the doctor? And the doctor says, what's my schedule like? Another doctor says, what's my day like? Another doctor says, how does today look for me? These are all basically intents. Let's say that you have many doctors using the product Suki, and they're all kind of asking in different ways, what's my day looking like? And some of those intents will break. Typically, when an intent breaks, you're using your Alexa and you say something to it, then what do you do typically? If it doesn't understand you, you say it again. And you say it in a slightly more structured way so it actually gets it. Now you have two pieces of data that you created out of it, right? One, you basically got data around intents that don't work and the associated audio that actually you need. And then second, you got data around what was the follow-up question that actually, or the follow-up intent. And you can almost always tag it together and say that basically this broken intent solution was this next intent that was actually triggered. Now, imagine getting those data points at thousands and thousands of those for a particular intent. What we do typically behind the scenes is we will take a lot of that information and actually use humans to clean it. Okay, data, if used basically directly into a model, first of all, is prone to biases, bad signals. It can look right, but actually could be really wrong, and more importantly, it could cause actually real significant product failures later on. And so we clean it, and then you automatically push it into the system, and the consequence is that within a very short period of time, almost every way in which you can ask the doctor what, or the doctor asks Suki what my day looks like or what my schedule looks like, is captured. So it's a classic example, a very simple example, but a very, very measurable example for us, Pinkesh, where I have, in a matter of a few months of launching Suki, been able to collect almost every variation of the 20 to 30 workflows that a doctor does again and again repeatably, and being able to create a model around that in such a way that we now have pretty much the foremost intent recognizer in the market. Now, there would be many, many other ways people would have done that, but the classic, the fact that we could actually build a machine learning based intent recognizer that actually coupled with a continuous inflow of data that comes in from the users, combined with a cleaning system that actually cleaned it, tracked it, make sure the accuracy was high, leads to such that things that would take people years in previous iterations of product takes us months now to actually get done.
Absolutely.
So it's an example of how you can use data. Now, this problem I'm solving hypothetically is an enterprise problem, but the problem that I was describing to you is a consumer problem. So this blur is
Absolutely.
just,
Yeah. It can be applied to any of the two contexts, is what you're saying. And
it can be, and anybody who thinks that enterprise businesses or enterprise structures need completely different ways of looking at data is wrong, because they're the same. It's consumerization of enterprise.
yeah, and what problems are they solving? In fact, the poll results very interestingly kind of confirm what you're saying as well. The sentiment, at least, is, hey, look, 57% are saying that the most popular data science usage that they've seen is around data-driven features. Kind of similar to what you were saying. Because of the technology, because of the data science, we're able to kind of tag that intent and kind of build a better, clear picture for doctors. The second highest voted was 55%, because it was a multiple choice question, so they could choose multiple options, was data science for decision science. And this is about making better decisions about your products, perhaps your segments,
Or strategy.
right? Or your strategy. Do you use much of that?
Yeah.
Did you leverage? I mean, before you said, look, I want to go solve this $10 billion problem in healthcare. Were there, other than reading Gartner reports or whatever other secondary research you may have seen, did you actually deploy a lot of data science in your early stages of MVP to even confirm whether this is the right problem to solve?
I think that, look, as a consumer-focused product person, a large swath of my energy obviously goes in using data to actually drive feature work, right? At least in the iteration where I was not the CEO of this company. Now, that changed dramatically when you actually go to places like Motorola and Flipkart. How do you decide where to put fulfillment centers? How do you decide, how do you route different kinds of goods to different areas depending upon what kind of demand? How do you decide basically that certain things, for example, if you have a very large number of textile oriented things coming from Surat, I'm just making up something, then how do you actually figure out how do you route that to the rest of the country? What is the decisions you're going to take in terms of a combination of third-party, delivery versus your own delivery, such that a really nice antique that's made in Kashmir can actually get to Kanyakumari in 48 hours. There are a lot of these decisions that have to be made that actually involve 5 to 10 year long time horizons over time, right? And they cannot be made without, they cannot be made in vacuum. They have to have data. We had a very rigorous data science team at Flipkart, it spent a lot of time churning away and chomping away at a lot of this data and trying to come up with basically answers to our questions. It did get to a place where we could just literally say, here are the questions we're trying to solve, and they would actually go and figure out the science behind it. And so if I ended up actually just spending time figuring out how to drive features using data, we would end up actually making seriously bad decisions for business, because a lot of that data actually tells us where these features should be deployed, how they should be deployed, what kind of ancillary services you need to actually do those kind of things. And so to me, the audience is mostly right. Those are the two areas that you actually have to spend a lot of time in. And the stakes are pretty high, especially when you're talking about companies that have huge fixed costs and capital investments. A pure SaaS company like Suki can afford to be much more agile in terms of its deployments, because it's just software. I'm moving bits around. And yes, whether I focus on a particular segment or the other can fundamentally alter my business, but it's not the same thing as me spending $10 million here versus there on a network of fulfillment centers that might actually come online in 48 months in such a way that if I didn't do that, then I'll not catch up to Amazon or anybody else I'm fighting.
Absolutely.
So these are very critical decisions that are taken, and without data science, you're just flying blind.
Switching from this into a good segue, which is, leveraging data science is, I think, key. What you're also saying is applying data science in the traditional product sense of kind of solving the right problem is also important. And maybe tying it back to a few questions that I'm seeing popping up, like, for example, Satish Simhachalan is asking this question on what are the top 3 skills required by a data science product manager or a data product manager. Adding to that, I think Gopal is asking something very similar. How deep does a product professional, in your opinion, your advice, how deep should they go, in the data space? We can talk about orientation level, application level, algorithm level. What is your advice? Is the Gopal's question. So maybe you can answer both then, and then can I have some more follow-ups?
Yeah, no question. Here's the way I look at it. I think first of all, as a product leader, you go as deep as you can so that you have direct and comfort. You have direct access and comfort that you actually have the right answers that you need for the question you're asking. And so from my perspective, if I'm going to be, let's say, a ML product manager today, then it does not suffice to actually sit there and say, I want to build this feature and somebody's going to build an ML black box and put it all together. I need to understand what kind of data is required. I need to understand how do you acquire that data. I need to understand how do you clean that data. I need to understand what happens when you put that data into these models and what is going to be spit out of it. I need to understand the quantity of data that's required to actually do these things. These are the kind of things that really, really world-class data scientists do day in, day out. Now, can I actually suddenly take on the role of a data scientist or be able to actually be in their position and do everything they've done? It's pretty hard. I would say there's experience and learning and things that they've done, but could go a long way, in being able to make the dent. I think partnering with really good engineering leaders who actually have spent time doing data engineering is useful. Partnering with, obviously, if you have data scientists in your crew, then working very closely with them is very useful. If you have the ability to even model some of these yourselves using some simple scripts, that is a great idea. And so how deep do you go? You go as deep as you can so that you can get the work done. I do believe anybody who's going to have a hands-off approach to this thing is looking for it's a little bit of a recipe for a disaster, regardless of what talent you have. If you are going to be the head of product of a company that's going to use data, then at least understand where the data comes from, what quantity of data you need, is it clean or not, and what does it take to actually put it together, and what's the quality of that data. You need to know the answers to these questions at the bare minimum. Beyond that, I think you go all the way to actually being a very rudimentary data scientist also yourself if you have to do that. So that's the way I look at it. When I hire people who actually have to work a lot with data, typically I'm looking for these attributes. I would ask them a question and I would basically try to see if they can actually break it down into where do you get the data from, how do you clean it, what quantity of data you need, and what happens when you actually put it into traditional models. A data product manager needs to be able to answer those questions always.
Very nice. When we asked this question in the community a few months ago, we got about 6 distinct, response vectors on what they felt was the most important career accelerator for a data product manager. In fact, the team has created a poll. Can you put that poll up for the community? And while that poll comes up and everybody's taking that, I think the follow-on question for you, Puneet, and see if you agree with, first of all, what the sentiments of the group here today through the poll. But before that, do you think in a data science-driven startup, and you in fact answered a question that I had written down that somebody was asking also on the group, which is, would you hire a product manager in a data science startup like Suki who's not, formally trained or at least understanding the elements of data? I think you already answered that. But do you think data is eventually going to become a horizontal infused skill in every part of the org? Or do you still feel that there is always going to be this kind of separate, data team, or is it going to be both? How are you
Wonderful
structuring it right now at Suki, and how do you see other companies, and what would be your advice for those who are just starting out, to kind of to structure the org, which path seems to be the best working for you in your experience?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think there are multiple questions here. So let's, first of all, do you think of data as a horizontal, or it should be basically something that actually is a function that actually supports everybody else? It sort of depends upon the scale and the size of your company to some extent. These are not exclusive situations. Okay. In my opinion, regardless of whatever stage of the company you're at, data and data-driven decision-making has to be basically a platform on which you sit. Okay. Data-driven feature work can be something that product people do. Data-driven decision-making, every single part of the company has to do. Okay. And what does that mean? It means that if you have an operations person, you better not be making decisions on how to actually decide to throw people at a problem without actually understanding what happens when a little bit more usage comes in, and what is the incremental usage, what is the weekly cadence, how do you project these things out? If you are going to be a salesperson, then you better not be actually figuring out where to put your investments without actually doing some amount of analysis on what kind of campaigns and what kind of things actually trigger what kind of demand in certain areas. Obviously, product is the same, design is the same. There is no, if there is any part of the company, HR, culture, if there's any part of the company that says that they can make a decision without data, then I will be very troubled, because there is a pretty good chance that they are going to be biased by their, instincts, which may be right sometimes, but could actually be very bad or disastrous at other places. So that's one point. The second point is that, if it's a company of tremendous scale with unbelievable amounts of investments to be made, having a dedicated data science team in addition to a platform that people can use to make decisions, both make sense. Flipkart had that, Moto had that. There is obviously swaths of Google where we have that, used to have that too. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And then I think what was the third question, Pinkesh? I think there was another attribute you had actually.
So when organizations are kind of starting out, right?
Yes. Yes.
What would you recommend? Because it may be a luxury to kind of have a dedicated data science team.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's a very risky thing to have kind of Neem Hakim, right? Somebody who knows a little bit of data and still makes, so what do you recommend?
Yeah, I agree. So when you're starting out, you have no option. Okay, anybody who actually starts out and says they're going to build a data science team, I will not trust my money with, because I actually think they don't have, they are building too much. They're overbuilding the company without actually having proven something. This doesn't mean data science is not required. It means that if you actually are going to hire, a product manager, a data science person, a designer, an engineer, and you want to start a company, then I'll be very worried, because at the early days of the company, you are the one who is all of those things. And so the way I look at it is, for companies that are starting, especially companies that I would invest in, I want to see the founder actually have enough information and knowledge. It doesn't matter if they don't have the frameworks or the tray or the classic, styles and things that data scientists do, but I want to see them do whatever they can with whatever information they have at disposal to make data driven decisions. And I do not think a company at a very, very early stage can afford to invest in a specific data science team. It can invest in a person who actually may have some data science capabilities in addition to other things. It can invest in themselves by educating themselves in how to actually manage these things. But ultimately, on the other side of things, any decision that this startup makes without any data and just based on instinct is fraught with significant danger too. And so therefore, when somebody comes to me and says, I'm making a decision, this is it. I'm not asking them if they have a data science team. I'm asking them, give me what data you use to make this decision and show me how that data is clean and not biased based on your point of view and things you want to do.
Excellent. Well, this is wonderful. I think time flies by when you're having an amazing conversation that's so immersive and insightful. But I think that is just about all the time we had. I know there are at least 16 more questions that I see on this window, and I'm sure numerous others on the LinkedIn thread. So I'd certainly request Puneet if you also can take a quick glance at some of those questions on the link offline and kind of answer. But as always, it's always a pleasure to interact, to learn, to get inspired by what you've done and what you're doing now, and wish you all the very best with the new venture. I'm sure it's going to do wonders as it already has. So thanks for joining. I know in a busy schedule like yours, it's hard, but all the way from California, guys, give a big round of applause virtually to Puneet, and thanks for doing this.
Pinkesh, I want to say that in these times of pandemic and other things, I think it takes a lot of effort for groups like you and folks like you to actually create a platform where a lot of people can interact with each other. It's not easy what you do and what your team has done. And I want to congratulate you and thank you for that. I think a lot of people benefit from the work you guys put in. It makes the world a better place. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's all for the ecosystem. All back to you, Sai.
Thank you so much, Puneet. Really appreciate the wonderful conversation and also the wishes. I totally concur with what you said in terms of, in these times, having these conversations is even more motivating and should be inspiring for others to do. So before we let you go, just 30 seconds, I think, Banu Nunna gets the best question award today for asking what you've already addressed in terms of how to use data, in terms of validation, using that for decision making in early stages of products and ideas. Folks, just take a few seconds, scan this, and send us a testimonial of how you liked it, what you would like to see more, and what you'd like us to improve. It is always important to keep learning and keep iterating and making this better. So it's a pretty nifty app the website that you will go to, and just open your camera and do a 30-second recording of it. Tomorrow we have two exciting sessions, and I think I saw several questions around 3 skills for data science manager. But we're going to have a dedicated session to that. Also, we're going to have a good panel discussion focusing on career accelerators towards leadership roles in data, chief data officers, chief analytics officers, and CEO and co-founders, especially in companies and products that use data. So do join us tomorrow. Thank you again to Puneet for sharing his time and insights with us. And here's a virtual token of appreciation from Institute of Product Leadership. So thank you all, folks. And before you drop off, again, take 10 seconds, provide the feedback that will come up on your screen anytime soon. And we'll hope to see you again tomorrow for the exciting sessions that we have. Right. Thank you. Stay safe and good night. Over to you, Sonal.
Thank you, Sai. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. with 2 more interesting sessions. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.